Hey, Mike Jackson here from Best of Tetons in beautiful Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Hey, today I want to talk about doing faux HDR images in Lightroom. Something that sounds like it's scary or something to worry about. It's actually pretty easy to do. And if you're doing landscape photography, for example, you can set your tripod up and you can do bracketed sets. That means you shoot overexposure, a medium exposure, and an underexposure, and you merge all those together into an HDR. If you're doing wildlife photography, the problem is the animals move around a little bit and it's harder to do multiple images of the same thing. And so this is one of those cases where the tools in Lightroom will give you a chance to expose after the fact an overexposure and underexposure, and then you can blend all those together into a single HDR image that's stored in DNG format that is fully editable. So that's basically what we're going to talk about today. Let me throw this out really quick, just in case you're a little scared of these terms. You got faux HDR, and all that basically means is faux means imitation or fake, and HDR has to do with dynamic range, high dynamic range. So our eyes can see, without using a lot of techno babble, I could look it up, but our eyes can see a lot more dynamic range than the cameras usually can pick up, at least in one shot. And so a lot of times you'll do a stacked image with multiple exposures, then you merge them all together. But as it turns out, there's a lot more information in the shadows that your camera is picking up, and a lot more information in the highlights that your camera is picking up. You just don't get to use them until you do this technique. So that's really all we're going to talk about here to start out. This is an image I took in October 26, 2019 at 11:53 in the morning. It's kind of not a great time to be taking photos, but when you got an animal like this, like a bird, sitting in a tree without a bunch of stuff in front of it, you got to shoot the shot. And you can see it's a real life photo. I probably should have overexposed it a little bit, and actually I probably did. But this is one I like the expression better, so I want to salvage this image, and I'm going to use this technique of faux HDR to do that. I'm in the grid view of Lightroom Classic. There's 3 steps to doing this faux HDR. The first one is make 2 virtual copies. Then we'll do some adjustments on the 2 virtual copies, and then we'll select all 3 of the parts, and then we'll merge those together into a single HDR DNG. To make the virtual copies, I select the original image, and then I'll go to Photo, go down to Create Virtual Copy, and you'll see that there is a command here, a shortcut command if you want to use it. On a Macintosh, it's Command apostrophe. On a PC, this is one of the times it's a little bit different. It's Control apostrophe. There's the first one. Now this time I'll go ahead and use the Command apostrophe option. And you'll see in the upper corner it says Copy 1, Copy 2. I'm going to select one of the 2 images. It doesn't matter which one's first. And I want to do an overexposure on one and an underexposure on the second one. So all I'm going to do now is I select the first one and go D for Develop. That's my shortcut command. And if you remember, I told you I underexposed this one by 1. So in this case, I'm going to overexpose by 3. You can see the number there. It doesn't have to be exactly 3, but at 3 in this particular image, you can see that I still have all the details in the bird here. If I went too far, you can see I can burn it out. So I really want to stay around 3, and say OK on that. I'll go G for Grid, and you can see that it's a much brighter image, but I still hold a lot of details. And I'll switch over to the new image. I just click on it and go D for Develop. And in this one, since I'm underexposed already, I would normally do 2 plus and 2 negative. But in this case, I'm just going to take this down to 1 negative. And I'll go back to G for Grid. And you can see I have my regular exposure, my bright exposure, and my underexposure. And to make this work, all we do is select all 3. And the next step is to merge those together. With all 3 images selected, let's merge these together into an HDR. Easy enough. Go to Photo, Photo Merge, HDR. If you want to use the shortcut commands, that's going to be Control H on both Mac and PC. So I'll click one time. And you have some options here. Auto align, I usually leave that on. Auto settings gives me a pretty good base starting point when the image is all merged together. And I think that's pretty much all we got to do. And you can adjust these. These have to do with if you have multiple photos that are different, slightly different. The ghosting will help you out there, but it's not important on this one. I can say none. So I'll go merge. And there'll be a creating HDR dialog box in the upper corner, and a few seconds later we'll have a DNG version of this HDR image. There it is. Now I'm still on the grid view. If you double click on the new image that we just created, you can see that it's a fully editable HDR DNG, and I'm not sure why the copy one's there, but it's still the same image with a lot of adjustments, presettings already applied to it. And hit D for develop. You can see that the auto settings adjusted the highlights down, the shadows up, may have changed the temperature a little bit, might have brought the vibrance up and all that. So these are still fully editable images, and that's the beauty of this. I would call this done on some images, but let's say on this one I'll go ahead and do a little bit of additional work on it. First thing I noticed that it's a little bit on the yellow side, so I can bring the yellow saturation down, neutralize a little bit. You can also see that I'm still a little bit underexposed, so I'm going to bring that on up a little bit until it starts banging on the edges. And I could put a vignette on it. I have some actions or presets that I could add the action, so I'll do that. Put a medium. And one of the things I would notice here is his face is still a little bit dark, and it's mostly around his eyes. So I can do a brush adjustment, and all I'll do here, I can double click the effect, and that resets everything to 0. So on this one I'll bring up the exposure just a little bit. My brush is too big. I want to bring his eyes in a little bit brighter and just paint it in right there. And if I think I still want to go a little bit brighter, I can. These are all sliders, so you can change it any time you want. And if I wanted to do like an overall on his face, I could still do that. I do new adjustment, and I can paint his whole face a little bit if I want to. Well, that's way too much, right? So I'm just going to bring that down a little bit until I'm happy with it. Paint a little bit more right there underneath his chin. And we can pretty much call this image complete. I can still go in and do some minor tweaks here and there, but effectively we can go back to grid. I'll show you, there's our original image and there's our adjusted image. So you can see there's a lot of improvement over the original image. Even if I spend a lot of time with the adjustment brushes and painted in certain areas and so forth, it would take a long time to bring it up to what I did there in the HDR version of it. And I think if you understand what you can do with it and why you do with it, you will be using this tool quite a bit. Now I'm going to show you how to make it even faster by using some of the presets. You can build your own presets, and I'll show you how to do that real quick. Earlier you saw me click one of my presets and I put a vignette on the corners around the edges. Well, that was a preset that I made. So I'm going to show you how to do it, and specifically for this project I'm going to do some plus and minus exposure presets. So here we go. I'm in the grid view now in Lightroom Classic. I've got my original single as shot image, and I'm going to go through this a little quicker and show you how fast this can be. So there's the first image. I'm going to go Command apostrophe. I'll make a virtual copy. Command apostrophe, make a virtual copy. Select any one of those two. And then I'm going to go for D for develop. That's pretty easy. And give it I'll give this one the +2 amount. Get closer. Doesn't matter if it's exactly or not. And then I will go to presets, hit the plus, create preset. I'll give it a name, and normally I will have a bunch of these things, so you can say check none if there is a whole bunch. Click on exposure, and all we're doing now, we're making a stackable preset. In this case, all I want to do is adjust the exposure value. So I'm going to call it exposure +2. Create, and now over on the left hand side you'll see it'll build a new preset. And now I'll go exposure -1 up to +1, File, Create Preset, Exposure +1, it'll show up in the list. I go Exposure -1, add it to the list, Preset, Create Preset, do all that same thing again. In this case I'm just doing the exposure, so Exposure -1, Create, -2, Create, I didn't give it a name, -2, Create. So now over on the left hand side you'll see I've got -1, -2, +1, +2. Okay, drum roll please. I've reset the image so it's back to the original single image, and this is how fast I would normally do it. So Command apostrophe, select the first one, D for develop. I'm going to go +2, and remember I wanted to go to 3, so I just have a preset that's set to 2, but I'm going to go ahead and bring that up to 3, and then I'll go to the next image, and I'll hit -1, G for grid, select the first one, select the last one, Control H, that brings up the HDR dialog box, merge, and you'll see, you know, this actually goes pretty fast once you understand what's going on. And there's our HDR converted image, copy to, and at that point now I just do the same editing I did before. Sometimes it takes a lot of steps that look complicated even on a video to get you to the end, and what I hope you'll see, you know, in that last little clip was that once you get everything set up and once you understand how to do it, you can make these things go pretty fast. And so I have all these shortcut commands, I have all these presets, and once I understand what to do, you know, I can blast through a bunch of images pretty quick. Same thing with panoramics. So someday maybe I'll be able to do a presets video and a little bit more detailed on how to do some of those, but I think you got the basics now, and you can do your own presets and save yourself a bunch of time. I use a lot of them.